Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on Service Desk Key Performance Indicators. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast usually lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking and assessments. We perform benchmarks and assessments for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the service desk, desktop support, and call center benchmarks and assessments for MetricNet. Now, the work we do for service desks worldwide spans the gamut, from benchmarking and idle assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the service desks that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of our website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our online content. This includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you'll be enrolled as a free premium member. And each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of our benchmarking lineup. There are three ways you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are peer group benchmarks that compare your service desk, call center, or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our most comprehensive custom benchmarks, very comprehensive in scope. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, for those who are interested in a continuous improvement initiative, MetricNet recently launched its one-year path to world-class performance. This program begins with a benchmark and an ROI calculation of your service and support organization. Following that is a 6 to 9 month improvement phase where we assist you in implementing the recommendations that come out of that benchmark. The program concludes with a second benchmark and ROI calculation approximately a year after the initial benchmark to objectively measure the progress that's been made and to prove definitively that your service and support organization has indeed achieved world-class performance. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all of the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow along during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just to follow along. Now, for those who are attending the Fusion Conference in Washington, D.C. next month, I want to make you aware that MetricNet has been selected as a speaker and will present its research on the trade-off between cost and quality and how to strike the optimal balance between these competing objectives in service and support. We'll be presenting session 302, scheduled for Monday, October 20th at 3 p.m. For those who are interested, we hope to see you at the presentation. And if I haven't met you personally yet, please come up and introduce yourselves at the presentation. One final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. The survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you would do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful to you, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You know, over the years, MetricNet has completed literally hundreds of benchmarks for service desks and desktop support groups worldwide. And one of the advantages of doing that many benchmarks and assessments is that we've built up the most comprehensive database of IT service and support metrics in the industry. This data gives us a lot of insight into the key success factors of the industry's top performing support organizations. So it's worth pointing out right up front that everything you see and hear today is empirical in nature. There's nothing hypothetical, academic, or theoretical about what I'm presenting today. It's simply based upon what we've observed in the industry, having completed literally thousands of IT service and support benchmarks. Now, I'd like to introduce you to some of the more common KPIs for the service desk. Here on page 9, there are about 25 different key performance indicators listed. They're organized into 6 categories: cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling metrics. Now, there are literally hundreds more. I don't want to lead you to believe that this is an all-inclusive list of the KPIs. However, these are the most common key performance indicators that we see in the service and support assessments that we do. However, we've heard this expression: if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. But there is a lot more than that to the story. Specifically, what we find in the industry is that most support organizations collect a lot of data, but they don't do much with it. They don't do much analysis with it. And as a result, they don't gain much insight from all those key performance indicators. And as a result of that, in turn, there's not much action. But key performance indicators by themselves are not very useful. Unless you're willing to analyze and evaluate them, gain some insight from them, and then take action on them, they're really not worth very much. And so what we espouse at MetricNet is an approach called the holistic approach to performance measurement and management. Now, historically, what we've seen is that there's an overemphasis on measurement. I just mentioned this. At least 75% of the effort around performance measurement and management is tied up in just collecting data. But most of those organizations don't do much with that information. There's not much analysis, there's not much action planning, and there's very little action that results from all those measurements. This historically is what has characterized service and support organizations in this industry. But in the last 3 to 5 years, what has emerged is a very different approach. We call it the holistic approach. It de-emphasizes the actual measurement, recognizing that less is more, but it emphasizes the analysis, the action planning, and the action itself. Now, as you move up this pyramid, the pyramid on the left, the inverted pyramid on the right, you can see that the value increases. Action is far more valuable than action planning. And action planning, in turn, is more valuable than analysis, which in turn is more valuable than the measurement itself. So the holistic approach to performance measurement and management in service and support essentially turns the historical pyramid upside down, and it says, less is more. We're going to de-emphasize the measurement piece of this, and we're going to focus instead on the analysis of metrics, the action planning, and then the action itself that enables us to continuously improve our performance in IT service and support. And that leads us to our central question of the day, which is how do we turn service desk key performance indicators into a competitive advantage? How do we make service and support better and faster and cheaper? And by the way, this is not just a catchphrase. There's true value here. These are the 3 dimensions of competition. Better refers to higher quality, faster means quicker resolution times, and cheaper means lower cost per ticket. So what we want to do today is look at how key performance indicators can give us a competitive advantage in IT service and support. But before we get to that, let me talk about what it means to be a world-class service desk, because you will hear me use that terminology throughout this presentation. There are 4 elements of this. The first is that the service desk will consistently exceed customer expectations. The result is that you get high levels of customer satisfaction. But that by itself is not enough. You also have to manage your costs effectively, and specifically, we look at cost per contact to be below industry average levels, and we look to see that you're taking measures to minimize the total cost of ownership in service and support by maximizing level 1 resolution rates. I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes as we get into our presentation. Thirdly, we want to see that you're following industry best practices. Now, the good news is that the best practices in IT service and support are pretty well defined and documented at this point. And then finally, and most subjectively, we want to see that every transaction adds value. It creates a positive experience for the customer, and that in turn drives a positive view, not just of service and support, but of IT overall. Now graphically, here's what it means to be a world-class support organization. When we take data from our benchmarking database, that's what these blue circles represent, and we regress cost per contact against quality as measured by customer satisfaction, we can clearly see that there is a correlation. Moreover, it is a cause and effect relationship. Typically, the cause is cost, the effect is quality, although there are some organizations that are predominantly driven by quality, so quality is the cause that drives the cost. But in most organizations that are cost constrained, we find that cost is what drives quality. So not only is this a correlation, it is a cause and effect relationship. Moreover, it is a non-linear relationship, which is why as the quality improves, the cost increases disproportionately. That's just diminishing returns, and you find that everywhere in the economy, whether it's buying a new car, going on a vacation, buying an airline seat on a flight. It doesn't matter. As the quality improves, typically the cost increases disproportionately. And it's helpful to understand that because if you're way out here on the far right, what it tells you is that you can probably reduce your costs pretty dramatically without sacrificing much quality at all. By contrast, for organizations that are very cost constrained, that are operating way down here, oftentimes it's possible to improve your quality dramatically without increasing your costs very much at all. So it's helpful to understand where you are on this curve. But the real point of this chart is to illustrate that when it comes to being world-class, we have this data bounded on two sides. On the lower side, we've got the average service desk or the typical service desk. On the top, the data is bounded by what we consider to be a world-class service desk. It's possible to be world-class at a very low price point for organizations that are spending $5, $6, $7 per inbound contact that manage to eke out a decent level of customer satisfaction. We consider them to be world-class because they are achieving the best possible result with the limited resources that they have. By contrast, organizations that are spending $100 or $200 or even $300 per inbound contact, if they are able to achieve the best possible result given the resources they have, they are also world-class or best-in-class performers. The real issue about world-class performance is this. Are you taking the limited resources you have and deploying them in such a way that you achieve the best possible result? So being world-class is not an absolute concept. We get questions almost every day from organizations that want to know what cost per contact, what speed of answer, what first call resolution rate, what customer satisfaction, etc. do I need to achieve to be considered world-class? And the answer is it depends. It really depends upon the resources you have at your disposal, not just the dollars, but the headcount, the technology, and other resources at your disposal. And if you are deploying those in the most effective possible way, it doesn't matter if you're way down here on this curve or way up here on this curve, you are world-class because you are achieving the best possible result with the limited resources that you have. Let's shift gears now and begin our discussion about best practices for key performance indicators. MetricNet has developed a four-part model which addresses this. And again, this is a very empirical model. It's based upon our observations, having completed several thousand service and support benchmarks in the last 27 years. The four-part model addresses performance measurement, performance diagnosis, that is using the measures diagnostically to figure out what's going on, action planning or prescription, and then implementation. Schematically, this is what the best practices model looks like. Every component is connected to every other component, and it is a continuous process, all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. You see, enthusiastic customers want to do business with you. They like doing business with you. They propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals about the service that they get. They're loyal to your channel. That is a vast difference from customer satisfaction. You want your customers to be satisfied, don't get me wrong, but really what you're after is customer enthusiasm. Now let me give you a medical analogy here that will help explain this model. If you go to a doctor, say for an annual physical, or perhaps because you're not feeling well, typically one of the first things that doctor does is take some measurements. They might measure your blood pressure, your temperature, they might do an EKG, they might do an MRI, but it starts with measurement. Now a good doctor isn't going to say, well, gee, your temperature is high, your blood pressure is elevated, go home and get better. A good doctor is going to diagnose what all those measurements mean. They're going to figure out what the underlying conditions are. And then that good doctor is going to develop a prescription, not necessarily a prescription for drugs, although it could be that, but it might be a prescription for a change in lifestyle. Sleep more, drink less, stop smoking, for example. It might be a prescription for surgery. It could be a prescription for a lot of different things. But you as the patient have to implement that prescription to benefit from it. And it continues in this cycle here. Now, this model is self-reinforcing and it is synergistic. And one implication of that is that you don't have to be excellent in any one of these 4 areas to be world-class when it comes to performance, measurement, and management. All you need to do is be above average in how you measure your performance. You need to be above average in how you diagnose those measurements. You need to be above average in your action planning, and you need to be above average in your ability to take action on those action plans. That's the beauty of synergy, is that when you put it all together, if you're a little bit above average in each of these 4 areas, you are going to be world-class, not just in performance measurement and management, but you're going to be world-class in your service and support organization. Because this component of our best practices model, MetricNet has a 6-part best practices model, this component, which addresses performance, measurement, and management, is the single most important driver of world-class performance. By contrast, you can be excellent in 3 of these areas and weak in one of the 4 areas, and you will not have a world-class performance measurement and management function, nor will you have a world-class support organization. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that you've got to be world-class in each of these 4 areas. That's not the case at all. All you have to do is be a little bit above average in each of these 4 elements of the model, and you will have a world-class performance measurement and management function and a world-class service and support organization. We're going to start by looking at the first component of our model, which is the measurement piece, and I'm going to show you that big ugly list of metrics that I pointed to earlier and suggest that we don't need these 25 KPIs to do an effective job with managing our performance in service and support. What we really need is a short list of metrics that really matter. What I've shown on this page are 7 KPIs, actually 6 KPIs plus an aggregate metric called the Balanced Scorecard. We've got cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first contact resolution rate, first level resolution rate, which is different than FCR, agent job satisfaction, and an aggregate metric, which we call the Balanced Scorecard. We're going to explore each of these 7 metrics in depth, but let me touch on each of them briefly right now. Cost per contact is your primary efficiency measure, and customer satisfaction is your primary effectiveness measure. These are the yin and yang of service and support. They are what we call the foundation metrics. The reason we call them that is because everything you do in service and support boils down to 2 things. 1, cost containment, and 2, driving the best quality customer interactions possible. Nothing else matters. That might sound very draconian, but it is the reality. It doesn't matter if you're making a decision about technology, headcount, organization structure, approving a project, or having a pizza party on a Friday afternoon. The question you should be asking yourself is this: in the long run, does this decision, will this action, in the long run, help us contain our costs and help us increase the quality of our customer interactions? If the answer is not yes to one or both of those questions, you just don't do it. It's as simple as that. So viewed through that prism, will this action, in the long run, reduce or contain our costs and or improve the quality of our customer interactions? Viewed through that prism, you can greatly simplify managerial decision-making in IT service and support. Well, there's a catch here, and the catch is this. Cost per contact and customer satisfaction are not directly actionable. And by that I mean that if I go in and do an assessment or a benchmark of an organization and I find that their costs are high or their customer satisfaction is low, I can't directly tweak cost or customer satisfaction, but I do have control of the underlying drivers of cost and customer satisfaction. Specifically, agent utilization is the big driver of cost per contact. And first contact resolution rate is the big driver of customer satisfaction. I do have control over these two metrics. So if I want to affect cost, I need to look at labor utilization, not just with the agents, but also the indirect personnel, the supervisors, the team leads, the workforce schedulers, the QA, QC people, the trainers, and the like. And if I want to affect customer satisfaction, I've got to pull this lever. I've got to look at first contact resolution rate and determine whether or not I might have an opportunity to increase the first contact resolution rate. Now the fifth metric on our short list is first level resolution rate, different from FCR. First level means you resolve it at level 1, not necessarily on first contact. So typically FLR will be greater than FCR. Average FCR in North America last year was about 70%. Average FLR in North America last year was about 80%. So what it says is that on average about 70% of contacts are being resolved on the initial contact with the user, whereas about 80% of inbound contacts at level 1 are being resolved at that level. So what that tells you is that about 10% of what comes in isn't resolved on first contact, but it is still resolved at first level. Typically, this would be when somebody calls in, you can't resolve the issue on the phone, you need to do some research, you need to do some back office work, whatever it might be, and then you call them back later or send them an email and say, I've resolved it. It may have taken you a couple hours, may have taken you a couple of days, but you've still resolved at first level. The reason this is important is because resolving at level 1 is far less expensive than resolving at the desk side, i.e. through desktop support, and it's way less expensive than escalating to N level within IT, say a NOC, or a data center, or an applications group, and it's certainly less expensive than sending it out to field support or to a vendor. So first level resolution rate is a proxy for total cost of ownership in service and support. The higher this number is, the lower your TCO will be in service and support. Now agent job satisfaction, a lot of people find it curious that we would consider that on the short list, on the 80-20 list of the metrics that really matter. But what we found is that agent job satisfaction is a bellwether metric. And by that I mean that it has an indirect influence on many other key performance indicators in IT service and support. High levels of agent job satisfaction are correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. Moreover, they're inversely correlated with turnover, meaning that the higher the job satisfaction is, the lower the turnover is. And if you've worked in this industry for very long at all, you know that turnover is a big issue. Also, agent job satisfaction is inversely correlated with absenteeism, meaning that the higher the job satisfaction is, the lower the absenteeism is. I want to give you an interesting way of thinking about absenteeism. Let's say that the absenteeism industry average is about 10%, which is about what it is. Let's say that your absenteeism is 15%, just for the sake of the argument, just to make up a number. What that means is that relative to the industry averages, you have to carry 5% more staff just to take into account the extra absenteeism that you find in your service desk. So absenteeism is pretty important because it is an indication of how much extra staff you have to carry to take account for those that are not showing up for work, whether it's 5%, 10%, or 20%. Positive agent job satisfaction, or high levels of job satisfaction, are positively correlated, or inversely correlated, I should say, with both absenteeism and turnover. So this is a bellwether metric that has a ripple effect across the organization. Moreover, you do have control over agent job satisfaction. I'll show you a little bit later in this presentation what those levers are and how you can control and influence agent job satisfaction. The last metric is actually an aggregation of the metrics before, the 6 that preceded this. It's called the balanced scorecard. If you think about it, in this business, you've got a lot of moving parts. You've got cost metrics, you've got quality metrics, you've got contact handling metrics, you've got productivity metrics, you've got service level metrics. And it's very difficult sometimes to answer the question, are we better off this month than we were last month? Are we better off this quarter than we were last quarter? Are we doing better this year than we were last year? The balanced scorecard rolls together and aggregates a series of metrics and gives you a single overall indicator of your performance. So it resolves that issue very elegantly by giving you a single score. It's kind of like your grade for the quarter or your grade for the semester. It tells you how you're performing overall. So the first metric I'm going to drill down on is first level resolution rate. And before I do drill down on it, I'd like to ask you a question. This is our first polling question of the day. There will be 3 polling questions in today's best practices presentation. And the polling question is this: are you tracking first level resolution rate for your service desk? You've got 3 choices here: yes, no, or not applicable. If you're not affiliated or running a service and support organization, you might answer not affiliated, or not applicable, sorry. So yes, no, not applicable. Now while you're filling that out, and it looks like we're getting good participation, we're already up to about 70%, I just want to shout out to those of you who dialed in today. Some of you, we've actually got more than 20 companies represented on our webcast today. I want to thank those of you particularly in Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, and even in Eastern Europe for dialing in. It's the middle of the night your time, and it's quite an honor to have you with us here today. I'm just going to shout out a few names here. I'm picking these at random, so think nothing of the order or the specific names I'm calling out, but I do want to thank you for joining us. Brad Jones, thanks for being here. Hector Torres, great to see you. Glad you could make it. Let's see, Michelle Fleck, thanks for joining us. Shane Cummings, great to have you here. Let's see, Stefan Taylor, great to be here. Glad to have you. Tammy Fest, thanks for joining us. Okay, we've got just about 90% now voting on this poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll down, and I'm going to share these results with you. First level resolution rate, 68%. 2/3 of you are measuring first level resolution rate, 26% of you are not measuring FLR, and then 6% are not applicable, presumably because you are in a different industry or you're not actually managing a service and support organization. Now this is good news. When I started asking this question as a poll in our webcast 5 years ago, the results were almost the reverse of this. About a quarter of those on the webcast would say yes, they're tracking FLR, and 2/3 or 3/4 would say that no, we are not tracking first level resolution rate. So this is a positive sign. This is an indication that the industry is catching up and recognizing the importance of first level resolution rate, resolving at level 1 as opposed to desktop support or some end level within IT, because it helps reduce the overall cost of ownership. So thank you for participating in that poll. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion. And specifically, what I want to talk about is, again, first level resolution rate and the importance of getting it done at level 1. That's not just a pithy catchphrase. There's real economic value in resolving at level 1. Let me explain what I've got here. You've probably heard about level -1. You've heard about level 0, user self-help. You've heard about level 1, which is the service desk. Level 2, we consider to be desktop support. Now, your vernacular, your terminology may be different than this, but this is what we use at MetricNet just for consistency. Level 2 is desktop support. Level 3 would be end level within IT. It might be a NOC. It might be a data center. It might be an applications group. And then we've got field support, meaning that you've got to get into a vehicle to drive to the source of the problem and fix it there. And then you've got vendor support. Now, you've probably heard about this concept of shift left. The reason I've set this diagram up the way I have is to illustrate the power of shift left. If you have a ticket being resolved by desktop support at an average of $62, these figures, by the way, are from last year, 2013, in North America, the US and Canada combined. The fully loaded cost of resolving a ticket at desktop support last year was about $62. The fully loaded cost of resolving a ticket at the service desk last year was about $22. So if you're resolving at desktop support when you could and should resolve at level 1, you can see that there's a defect cost there of about $40. So shifting left, shift a ticket left from 2 to 1, shift a ticket left from 1 to 0, shift a ticket left from 1 to -1, for example. Shift left is an indication of the economic power of resolving tickets at as far left on this spectrum as you possibly can. Level -1 is simply incident prevention, meaning that the user doesn't have the problem to begin with, either because they're well trained or because it's been designed out of the system, or possibly through root cause analysis, the service desk or some other IT entity within the organization has eliminated that source that source of the problem. So level -1, those are the best kind of tickets because they're no ticket at all. The user simply doesn't have the problem. Self-help can be useful in some areas. For example, simple problems like password resets and FAQs are appropriate for self-help. You need to be a little bit careful, though, about pushing too many tickets from level 1 to level 0, because one of the things you don't want is a highly paid person within your organization spending a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour in a self-help portal trying to solve their own problem when they could pick up the phone, call the service desk, and get it resolved in 15 minutes. So there are certain things that are appropriate for self-help, other things that are not appropriate for self-help. But the point of this is to indicate that there is a hierarchy here. And as you move right, the cost of resolution increases fairly dramatically. And so first level resolution, that is getting it done at level 1, is a proxy for total cost of ownership in service and support. As that number approaches 100%, what it says is that anything that can be resolved at level 1 is being resolved at level 1. Now there's a corollary metric at level 2, desktop support, called percent resolved level 1 capable, and I'm going to talk about that momentarily. But I want you to keep this diagram in mind because there's real power here, and the economic contribution made by IT service and support is in large part driven by your ability to shift left, your ability to resolve at level 1. Now what we found is that the organizations that are most successful at resolving tickets at level 1 typically operate a SPOC, a single point of contact support organization. Now let me explain this diagram. You've got your user community out here, you've got your level 1 service desk here, and then you've got your end levels out here. You've got desktop support, field support, level 2 within IT, such as the NOC, the data center, et cetera, and then you've got vendor support. Now how does the SPOC work? Well, to make SPOC, single point of contact, effective, the enterprise needs to take an end-to-end view of support. If you view the level 1 support independent from desktop support or independent from these other support entities, you're not taking an end-to-end view. So the first thing is that you've got to view support as an end-to-end process. Secondly, the customer has a SPOC. They have a single point of contact for all IT-related incidents, questions, problems, and work requests. And the level 1 service desk is, in fact, the SPOC. This is your single point of contact. This is not a political issue, an organizational issue. It's not a turf issue. It's a common sense issue. If you're going to have a SPOC, the place to have the SPOC, the single point of contact entry into the IT resolution process, is with the service desk. Now, this doesn't mean that level 1 solves everything, but it does mean they're responsible for triaging tickets and escalating them when necessary, resolve at level 1 if at all possible, effective handoffs to end level, desktop support, field support, vendor support, or excuse me, level N support and vendor support, resolution, coordination, and facilitation, and ticket closure. Now, I want to put a caveat on ticket closure. It doesn't mean that level 1 has to close tickets, but it does mean they're responsible for making sure that tickets do get closed. And we've worked with organizations that actually have individuals at the level 1 service desk whose responsibility is what are called ticket chasers. That is when a ticket is being held by desktop or field services or some end level within IT or the vendor, those ticket chasers are responsible for kind of staying on those individuals wherever that ticket resides at the time and saying, you got to get this thing done. The service level is going to expire. You got to get this thing resolved. You got to get the ticket closed. Now, to make SPOC work effectively, desktop drive-bys, you may have heard this terminology before, fly-bys, snags. This is when, for example, somebody's sitting at their desk, they see a desktop support technician, they grab the person, figuratively, sometimes literally, and they say, hey, I need some help. I'm trying to turn rows into columns in Excel, or I'm trying to archive these old Outlook items. Can you do it? The answer, if you're running a SPOC organization, should be, no, I can't, because that violates the support model. What you need to do is call the service desk, and if it makes sense to dispatch a desktop support technician, they will dispatch me. But these cause costly errors within the organization because these desktop drive-bys and flybys, these are on average $62 tickets. And if even some of them can be resolved at level 1, you're creating defects in the system by violating the single point of contact model. So to make SPOC work, you've got to minimize this, we call it bypass in the industry. That is, the user bypasses the SPOC, they call desktop directly, or they may call end level directly, they may even call the vendor directly, they might call field services directly, but when you bypass this single point of contact entry and those violations are pervasive and common, what you're doing is building very costly escalation errors into your support model. So SPOC enables you to minimize your total cost of ownership in service and support and to maximize your level 1 resolution rates. A few moments ago, I mentioned a metric called percent resolved level 1 capable. This metric, it sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. What it represents is at desktop support, the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. So let's say desktop support handles 1,000 tickets a month. And if we had some way of measuring how many of those could and should have been resolved at level 1, and there are ways to do that, which I'll get into later, let's say 200 of those tickets could and should have been resolved at level 1. What that says is that your percent resolved level 1 capable is 20%, because you had 1,000 tickets and 200 of them could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Now, if we look at the percent resolved level 1 capable with and without a SPOC, okay, the blue diamonds are with single point of contact, and the average percent resolved level 1 capable is about 15%. However, when you don't have a SPOC, that is, you don't have this single point of contact intake model, the fuchsia-colored squares, percent resolved level 1 capable, averages about 23%. So we got about a 7.5 percentage point difference here between SPOC and no SPOC when it comes to percent resolved level 1 capable. So here's evidence, here's data, if you will, that indicates when you've got a SPOC, you can help reduce your total cost of ownership and service and support by minimizing these tickets that get resolved at desktop support and elsewhere that could and should have been resolved at level 1. Okay, so we've talked about first level resolution rate. Let's talk about this balanced scorecard. I sort of praised it and said that a balanced scorecard really answers the question, how are we doing versus last month, last quarter, last year? Let me explain how this scorecard is built. We take the 6 most important KPIs for the service desk. Now, you don't necessarily have to agree with these. If you want to construct your own service, your own balanced scorecard, I would encourage you to do so. Pick the metrics that you believe to be the most important. These represent our best judgment as the metrics that really matter in a level 1 service desk. The second thing we do is we weight each one of those metrics according to its relative importance. And of course, those weightings have to add to 100%. Now, you can see here that we've overweighted cost and customer satisfaction, again, because these are the foundation metrics, the yin and the yang. Everything you do boils down to cost containment and or improving the quality of the customer interaction. So collectively, our foundation metrics get 50% of the weight. Then we put 15% of the weight on utilization. This is your big driver of cost. 15% of the weight on first contact resolution rate, 10% on job satisfaction. And I included a service level metric here, not because I like it, but because everyone in the world tracks service levels, and most people feel uncomfortable if they don't have at least one service level metric in the balanced scorecard. So I put it in there, ASA, gave it a 10% weighting. Then what we do is we will populate these 2 columns, the third and fourth columns from the left, with benchmarking data that is comparable to the organization that's building the scorecard. So for this particular benchmarking peer group, the highest cost per contact was $55. The lowest cost per contact was $9. The worst customer satisfaction was 64%. The best was 97.5%. So we show the worst and the best for a representative peer group. You would then put your own performance data in this third column from the right. And then you can calculate a metric score using this interpolation formula. The formula is this. We take the worst case and we subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of our ratio. The denominator of the ratio is the range. It's worst case minus best case. So worst minus best becomes the denominator. So this interpolates. It tells us how far along the path we are from the worst case to the best case. So a high number, like we have here on ASA, says that our 60-second ASA is much closer to the best case than it is to the worst case. A low number, as we have here for customer satisfaction, tells us that our 77.2% customer sat is much closer to the worst case end of the scenario than it is to the best case. So this metric score represents the percentage or the distance that you are along the path from the worst case to the best case. Now the final step in building the scorecard is to multiply the metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each metric in the scorecard. When you add them together, you come up with a single metric between 0 and 100%. And by the way, your metric score will also range between 0 and 100%. If you're at 0, it means you have the worst case performance in the peer group. If you're at 100%, it says that you have the best case performance in the peer group. So your balance score, total balance score, will also range between 0 and 100%. And in my 27 years of doing this, I've never seen a service desk achieve 100%, nor have I seen a service desk that had a 0% score, meaning no single service desk has, the worst performance in every metric, nor does any service desk have the best performance in any metric. It just doesn't happen because there are trade-offs that exist between these metrics. Now, this score may not be terribly meaningful the very first time you create your scorecard. However, over time, what you can do is calculate this every month or every quarter and see what the trend is. And if the trend is in the positive direction, that's a good thing. This is real data from one of MetricNet's clients from 2012. You can see that they started the year with a balance score of about 60%. They ended the year with a balance score in the high 70s. The purple background represents the trailing 12-month average, and the blue bars represent the monthly scores that they calculated from their balance scorecard. So if the trend is in the positive direction, that's a good thing, because what we've done is we've aggregated cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, contact handling metrics, agent metrics, and service level metrics. We've normalized them, rolled them together, created a single overall measure of performance that you can now use to track and trend how you're performing. You can also use it to compare to other service desks. In this particular case, we've got about 100 service desks that are shown here. Here's the 55.6%, the orange bar. This is what we just calculated over here in our example. You can see that the low performer here was 13.8% way down here. The high performer was in excess of 86% over here on the left. And the average for this peer group was just over 50%, which, by the way, when we take hundreds of service desks worldwide and run them through this algorithm, the average score is only about 50%. And we get a nice bell-shaped curve centered right above 50%. It's a normal distribution with tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left below 30%. Typically, if you're in the range of 50 to 62 or 63%, you're going to be in the second quartile. If you're above 63%, you're going to be in the top quartile. Between 37 and 50% would be third quartile performance, and below 37%, typically you're going to be in the fourth quartile for overall performance. So the value here is this. We've taken a disparate set of metrics, we've normalized them, we've aggregated them, and we've rolled them into a single all-inclusive measure of performance that we can use to compare to other service desks and that we can use to track and trend our performance over time. Okay, let's shift gears now. We've talked about performance measurement. What I want you to remember from that is that less is more. The 80-20 rule applies when it comes to KPIs. For the diagnostic, we're going to look at the following 5 metrics. We've already talked about FLR, first level resolution rate. We've already talked about the balance scorecard. And now what we want to do is talk about these final 5 metrics: cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, and first contact resolution rate, and agent job satisfaction. Now, in order to have this discussion, what I put together is a benchmarking case study. And what we're going to do is go through actual data from a benchmark that MetricNet completed to show you each one of these key performance indicators and what their correlations are to each other and what the cause and effect relationship is between these key performance indicators. Now, most of you are probably familiar with benchmarking. You've probably at least heard of the term. Some of you actually done benchmarking. I recognize quite a few of the names of the participants today, and I know that I've personally done benchmarks for some of you. But for those of you who are not familiar with benchmarking, let me define it very quickly for you. Benchmarking involves comparison. That is, you compare your service desk to a peer group of comparable service desks. You compare your cost per contact, your speed of answer, your customer satisfaction, your agent job satisfaction, your first level resolution rate, your first contact resolution rate, and the like. Now, that comparison by itself is interesting, but it doesn't get you very far. What you really need is a diagnostic behind that comparison. That is, in those situations where the peer group is performing better than you, you want to understand how they achieve a lower cost, a higher first level resolution rate, a higher first contact resolution rate, or higher customer satisfaction. So understanding what drives the gaps at the peer group, what enables some of them to achieve a better level of performance than your organization, is critical to benchmarking. Because if you understand how they achieve a better or a higher level of performance, you can do something about it. Specifically, what you can do is emulate them. You can adopt and adapt their best practices into your own organization. So benchmarking, the real power is this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve through trial and error incrementally at an evolutionary pace. Benchmarking enables you to build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers, thereby bypassing, leapfrogging ahead of all the trial and error associated with incremental improvement and achieving world-class performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. That's the real power of benchmarking. You can get there quickly by building upon the industry's proven best practices. Now, very early on, I showed you this chart, and there were some data points in between these two curves. I used the chart essentially to explain what it means to be a world-class service and support organization. Here I'm using the chart for a very different reason. I'm using the chart to explain what benchmarking does for an organization. Let's say that you're starting down here at some average performance level, and you want to get to this upper curve here. What benchmarking does is it identifies how you can move to the left, that is reduce your cost if possible, and increase the quality of the customer interaction if possible. And by the way, it always is possible to be more efficient and more effective. And they say, there's no free lunch, but the reality is, and that may be true when it comes to physics and the second law of thermodynamics, but when it comes to processes where unless you're optimized, which most organizations are not, there is a free lunch possible. That is, if you are sub-optimized, if you have not yet deployed your resources in the most effective, best possible way, it is possible to move the needle on both of these dimensions. That is, reduce your cost and at the same time improve the quality of service that you offer and get onto this upper optimized curve, the best-in-class performance curve. That's what benchmarking does for an organization, and that's why it's such a powerful tool. That brings us to our second set of polling questions for the day. There are two polling questions, and the first polling question is this: have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? Have you benchmarked your service desk in the past year? And again, I just want to shout out to some of the people. We've got several hundred on today's webcast. I want to shout out to a few of the people for joining us today. Abby Valenzuela, and again, I'm calling these out in no particular order. Denise King, thanks for being here. Joe Pardini, great to see you here. Let's see. Pedro Soto, so glad that you could join us today. Let's see. Tammy Light, L-I-C-H-T, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Tina Gettings, great to have you here. Todd Barnes, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, it looks like most of you have voted. We're up to about 80%. If you haven't voted, please vote on this poll, and I'll go ahead and close that poll down and show you what the results look like. Okay, have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? 33% have said yes, 60% say no, and then 8% not applicable. For those of you who have benchmarked within the past year, kudos to you. What we found at MetricNet is that there is a virtual one-to-one correlation between service and support organizations that benchmark on an annual basis and service and support organizations that are world-class. So if you're benchmarking, chances are you're a top-performing service and support organization. If you're not benchmarking, I want to encourage you to consider it. It doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't cost a lot of money, yet it's one of the best investments that you can possibly make. As I mentioned, there's a virtual one-to-one correlation, correspondence, if you will, between those that benchmark and those that are world-class. Okay, I'm going to open up the next polling question, which is related to that particular polling question. The next polling question is, do you intend to benchmark your service desk in the future? Do you intend to benchmark your service desk in the future? By the way, I just want to mention again, for those that are going to be at Fusion next month in Washington, D.C., MetricNet will be presenting its latest research on the trade-off between cost and quality in IT service and support. I believe it's session 306. It's on Monday afternoon of the conference, so it's on the first day of the conference. If you get a chance and would like to hear MetricNet speak on this, it's one of the most intractable issues in service and support. That is striking the appropriate balance between the cost of service delivery and the quality of service delivery. Those two metrics are in constant tension. The trick is to find an equilibrium point, find the point of minimum tension where you can deliver the best possible service at the lowest possible cost or price if you're outsourced. So if you're interested and you're going to Fusion next month, it'd be great to see you there. Please introduce yourself if you happen to come to my session. Okay. I'm going to close this poll down and show you the results. Here we go. 15% of you are planning to complete a service desk benchmark by the end of the year. Another 12% of you are planning to benchmark within the next 6 months, 30% within the next year, and 28% don't have any plans to benchmark at this time. Recall on the prior poll that slightly more than 30% have benchmarked within the past year. Now, for those 28% that aren't planning to benchmark at this time, my guess is that most of you fall into that category of those who have benchmarked within the past year. That's what I'd like to think. So if I interpret this poll very optimistically, what it says is that those who benchmarked in the past year currently don't have plans to benchmark in the future, but those that have not benchmarked in the past year, it looks like the majority of you are planning to benchmark in the coming year. 15% by the end of this year, 12% within the next 6 months, so roughly by the end of February or March next year, and then 30% of you are planning to benchmark within the next year. I just want to again offer encouragement for those of you that are considering benchmarking in the next, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year. As I mentioned, it's probably about the best investment you can make in a service and support organization. Doesn't have to cost a lot of money, doesn't have to take a lot of time, but the benefits are enormous. And as I mentioned, there's a virtual one-to-one correspondence between service and support organizations that conduct benchmarking annually and those service and support organizations that are world-class. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our discussion. What I'm showing on this page, page 39, is some real benchmarking data from a benchmark that was conducted by MetricNet. One note of caution here is that when you conduct a benchmark, you have to be, the single most important success factor in benchmarking is to select a peer group that is comparable to your own service and support organization. Specifically, that peer group needs to be comparable in the scope of services offered, in the scale, meaning the volume of tickets that you handle, in the complexity, typically measured by handle time, and in the geography. If you don't have comparability on those 4 dimensions, you're not going to get a valid benchmark. So I want to caution you against comparing your own service and support organization to the data that I've shown on this page. It's real data, but it is for illustrative purposes only. Now, me being a benchmarking guy, one of the first things I look at are the foundation metrics, cost per contact, and customer satisfaction. What we have here is a peer group of roughly, I think it was about 45 or so service and support organizations. The organization that did this benchmark had a cost per inbound contact of $28. The peer group was right at around $23. The organization that did this benchmark had a customer satisfaction, either satisfied or very satisfied, of 63%. Their peer group was at 79%. So we've got 2 pretty big red flags here. High cost, low customer satisfaction. Remember, these are the foundation metrics, and both of them are on the wrong side of where they need to be. We've got high cost, we've got low customer satisfaction, and we need to figure out why. And so I'm using this as a foil, if you will, or a case study to help explain the other 5 key performance indicators on our short list. Keep in mind, we've already talked about first level resolution rate, we've talked about the balanced scorecard, we're now going to talk about the remaining metrics. Now, cost per contact, customer satisfaction being the foundation metrics, you can think about them on a 2-dimensional chart as I've shown here. We've got cost on the x-axis, we've got quality on the y-axis. Quality is measured by customer satisfaction. I've broken this chart up into quadrants. On cost, we've got lower cost on the right, not higher cost, so that axis is somewhat counterintuitive. And then on the y-axis, we have higher quality as you move up the axis, lower quality as you move down the axis. Now, where you want to be here is in the upper right-hand quadrant. This is where you are both efficient, meaning lower cost, and effective, meaning high levels of customer satisfaction. Being in the upper right-hand quadrant is really the holy grail of service and support. Low cost, high quality, that's where you want to be. If you're in this upper left quadrant, it says that your quality is good, but your costs are also high, and over time you need to figure out how to reduce your costs so you can get into this upper right-hand quadrant. If you're in the lower right-hand quadrant, it means your costs are low, but your quality is also low, and you need to figure out how to improve your quality over time. Now, if you're in this lower left-hand quadrant, you've got the worst of everything. Your costs are high, and your customer satisfaction is low, and you need to be thinking about how you move up and to the right over time. How do you reduce your costs, and how do you improve the quality of customer service? Now, if you're optimized, you're going to end up on this outer curve here. This is just, by the way, I've flipped the axes on this chart right here. So cost per contact, we've got high on the left, low on the right, which is why the shape of the curve is roughly the same. So we basically just flipped the x-axis here. But to optimize, you need to be on this outer curve here. Sometimes that means you have extremely low costs, but you still manage to achieve pretty decent level of customer satisfaction. By the way, this horizontal line that goes through here is the average customer satisfaction for these 100 data points. The vertical line that goes through here represents the average cost per contact for the same data points. This particular service desk has a very low cost, but they still manage to achieve a reasonable level of customer satisfaction despite the fact that they're very resource constrained. By contrast, this service desk has a much, much higher cost than this one did, but they also have a much, much higher level of customer satisfaction. So this outer curve here represents the optimization curve. This is the curve where you are truly a world-class service and support organization. So think about cost and quality being in this tug of war that will never end. If you push too far in the direction of low cost, you will eventually sacrifice quality. If you push too far in the direction of high quality, you will increase your costs. So the trick is to find the point of minimum tension. Find that point where you're delivering the quality of service that your users feel comfortable with and that you feel comfortable with and that you can justify given the budgetary constraints that you operate under. And again, this whole issue, cost versus quality trade-off, is what I'll be speaking on at Fusion next month in Washington, D.C. Now, cost per contact is driven primarily by agent utilization. This is a labor-intensive function. Customer satisfaction is driven primarily by first contact resolution rate. So any serious effort to contain costs has got to look at agent utilization. How do we know this? Well, if we regress agent utilization versus cost per contact, you can see that as agent utilization increases, cost per contact goes down. That's not a surprise. Again, this is a labor-intensive function. In fact, roughly half the cost of a service desk is tied up in your frontline agents, their salaries and benefits. 2/3 of your cost is tied up in your personnel, including not just your agents, but your indirect personnel, your team leads, your supervisors, your QA/QC people, your workforce schedulers, and your trainers. So the slope we've got here is roughly 1 to 2, meaning that it takes about a 2 percentage point improvement in utilization to get a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. That's because only half your cost is tied up in your agents. So as agents are more effectively utilized, your cost comes down. It takes a 2 percentage point improvement in utilization to yield a 1 percentage point drop in cost per contact. You have to be careful, though, because we found that when you get much above 60% on agent utilization, you start to get higher levels of absenteeism and burnout. So it's not just a question of driving the agents to 70, 80, 90% utilization. That won't work. What you want to do is be somewhere in the range of 55 to 60%. That's kind of the optimal range. Now, we define utilization this way. It's basically phone and ear time divided by available time at work. So phone and ear time looks at both inbound contacts and outbound contacts, multiplies them by the inbound handle time and the outbound handle time. You divide that by the number of working days in a month, which in case you ever wondered is 21.5. Number of work days in work hours in a day, which is typically 7.5, and then multiply by 60 minutes to get the units right. So an example would be this. We've got inbound contacts of 375 per agent per month, outbound of 225 per agent per month. Inbound handle time of 10 minutes, outbound handle time of 5 minutes. You run the math on that, and you end up with a utilization of about 50%. Now, worldwide, the average agent utilization is, in fact, only about 50%. People are shocked by that number, and they assume that, well, gee, the agents must be goofing off. I mean, if they're only utilized 50% of the time, that means they're not productive 50% of the time. That's not true, though, because we don't back out sick days, vacation days, holidays, we don't back out training time, we don't back out administrative time, and we don't back out standby time, i.e. the agent's got their headset on, they're waiting for a call to come in, but there are no calls. We know that there's a certain amount of that unused time, if you will. So the average worldwide is only about 50%. We recommend organizations to be in the range of 55 to 60%. If you get much above 60%, you are going to experience some negative side effects of high agent utilization, specifically high turnover, high absenteeism. What about first contact resolution rate? Well, we see that as the FCR improves, so too does customer satisfaction. Blue diamonds here are data points. Red line is a linear regression through the data. Same thing was true with utilization versus cost per contact. Red line is a linear regression through the data points. Here the slope is 1 to 1, meaning that it takes about a 1 percentage point improvement in FCR to yield a 1 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction. So let's move on now and look at the underlying drivers of agent utilization, and specifically let's look at service levels, because there's a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions about the importance of service levels in this industry. Here what I'm showing is speed of answer versus cost per contact. If you've ever worked in workforce scheduling, you've seen this phenomenon before, but if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you'll come to the same conclusion, which is this. The more aggressive you get on your service levels, the higher your cost per contact is going to go. The reason is that you have to staff up to hit these more aggressive service levels. If I'm currently operating at an ASA of 100 seconds and my boss tells me we need to get that down to 50 seconds, I know I'm going to need additional headcount in order to answer the phones in 50 seconds. And if that person says we need to go to 25 seconds, I know I will need still more headcount. This is why the cost per contact goes up as the ASA goes down. Same thing is true in abandonment rate, very similar phenomenon. If I'm at 15% abandonment rate and I'm told to go to 10%, I know my costs will go up because I need more bodies to keep that AR down. If I'm told to go to 5%, it will go up still further because I know, again, I need more bodies to keep that abandonment rate down. Well, too often in this industry, particularly those that haven't worked in the industry for very long, there's an assumption that good service levels, meaning quick speeds of answer, low abandonment rates, yields high customer satisfaction, but that is a myth. That's false, and here's the data to prove it. On page 50, what I've shown is ASA versus customer satisfaction. But let me explain. ASA is not in seconds. I'm showing ASA as a percentage of total handle time. So let's say your handle time is 10 minutes per inbound contact. 10% of that would be 1 minute. Let's say your inbound handle time is 5 minutes. 10% of that would be 30 seconds. Here's what this chart is telling us, and this is a nonlinear regression, as you can clearly see. Blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a regression. This is an exponential regression through the data. What it says is this: as long as your speed of answer is less than about 10% of your handle time, you're fine. There's no point getting any more aggressive, because if you do, your costs are going to go up, but you get nothing in terms of customer satisfaction. So this myth, this false notion that if we have a quick speed of answer and a low abandonment rate, our customers are going to be happy, that's not true. What customers want is a high first contact resolution rate. That's how you make customers happy. You don't make them happy by answering the phones quickly or keeping their abandonment rate down. Customers are willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call, an occasional long speed of answer. What they're not willing to forgive is incompetence, as measured by first contact resolution rate. So service levels are a dual-edged sword. You don't want to get too lax on service levels. You can see that above 10% of handle time, as your ASA increases above 10% of your handle time, at some point your customer satisfaction will begin to fall off. Same phenomenon is true on abandonment rate. You can see that below 10% abandonment rate, you gain nothing on customer satisfaction if you improve your abandonment rate. But if you get too lax on this and you drop below 12, 15% abandonment rate or get in excess of that, you can see that your customer satisfaction will start to drop off. So what this suggests is that there's a sweet spot when it comes to these service levels. And the sweet spot on speed of answer is somewhere around 8 or 9% of your handle time. So again, if you have a 10-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 1 minute. You might want to back off of that a little bit and then have a 50 or 55 second speed of answer. Same thing with abandonment rate. Somewhere around 7, 8% is perfectly acceptable. Keep in mind that if customers don't get through the first time, if they abandon the call, they're going to call back typically, because generally they haven't resolved the problem. And again, customers are very forgiving of an occasional abandoned call, an occasional long speed of answer. What they're not very forgiving of is incompetence, as measured by first contact resolution rate. Another way to think of it is this: your speed of answer, in the greater scheme of things, is a pretty short component of the total transaction, particularly if you don't resolve on first contact. But even if you do resolve on first contact, a minute ASA in a 10-minute handle time, pretty insignificant. Most customers are smart enough to recognize that. Most customers now have speakerphones. Most customers are not completely out of business when they call you, meaning that they can continue to work, whether it's on a tablet or a laptop computer or a desktop computer. They can continue to work while they're waiting for you to answer the phone. So service levels, which historically have been the boogeyman of the industry, good service level equals good customer satisfaction, nothing could be further from the truth. You want to focus your time and attention on quality resources, i.e. achieving high levels of first contact resolution rate, and get to the ASA and abandonment rate you need to avoid falling off this cliff on the right-hand side, but don't overdo it when it comes to abandonment rate or speed of answer. Let's go to the right-hand side now. We've looked at CSAT and the fact that it's driven largely by FCR, first contact resolution rate. We know that a tertiary driver is training hours. So training is the great motherhood and apple pie of service and support. If everybody who claims that they were going to do the training that they claim they were going to do did the training that they claim they were going to do, we'd have a lot more training going on than there is going on. So there are very few organizations that walk the walk and talk the talk. Many organizations talk a good game when it comes to training, but very few actually follow through on that. However, it's not just motherhood and apple pie. This isn't just a nice luxury type item. The data shows that the more training your agents get, the more competent they become, as measured by first contact resolution rate. So the x-axis here represents new agent training hours all the way up to about 325 or so. The blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a linear regression through the data, and you can see that the more training the new agents get, the higher the first contact resolution rate goes. That's a good thing. What about annual training? That is, once the agent's been on the job and come up to speed, on an annual basis, how much training did they get? As that number increases, so too does the first contact resolution rate. All these blue diamonds here on the y-axis, those are organizations that don't provide any ongoing training for their agents. So they provide initial training. We don't see anybody on the y-axis here, but they don't do any training subsequent to that. But again, this is not just a motherhood and apple pie issue. It actually has a real impact on your ability to deliver quality transactions to your customers as measured by first contact resolution rate. So let's put this build together, starting with our foundation metrics driven respectively by utilization and first contact resolution rate, driven by this third set of metrics, tertiary set of metrics. We've got agent job satisfaction, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The big drivers of agent satisfaction are the amount and quality of coaching they get, whether or not there's a bona fide career path for them, and the amount of training that they get. So you can see how these KPIs are interconnected and interrelated to each other. The ones in red are the ones that are on our short list. These are the metrics that really matter. Your cost per contact and customer satisfaction are your foundation metrics. Your agent utilization is your big driver of cost. Your FCR is your big driver of customer sat. Your agent job satisfaction is a key driver as well of customer satisfaction. Your first level resolution rate impacts total cost of ownership in service and support. But understanding this cause and effect diagram is extremely powerful because it shows you very visually what levers you can pull to achieve desired outcomes. If you're trying to improve your cost, improve your utilization, sometimes that means you back off of your aggressive service levels. If you're trying to improve customer satisfaction, focus on first contact resolution rate. You can improve that in a variety of ways, sometimes through training, sometimes through technology, remote diagnostic tools like LogMeIn, BombGar, and others, sometimes through knowledge management tools that improve FCR. And agent job satisfaction also has the effect of improving, or improved agent job satisfaction has the effect of improving customer satisfaction. So understanding how the KPIs connect to each other, what the linkages are, what the cause-effect relationships are, is extremely powerful because it lets you know what levers you can pull to achieve desired outcomes. So that brings us back to the initial case study, the data that I showed you about 10-15 minutes ago. Remember, the cost was high, cost per contact was on the high side, customer satisfaction was on the low side. But we're now empowered because we know what drives cost and we know what drives customer satisfaction. So let's look at utilization, the big driver of cost. The utilization of this service desk, these agents, is 46.7%. The utilization of the peer group is 53%. So there's our first smoking gun. But we also know that agent utilization can be driven by aggressive service levels. So let's look at the service levels. The average speed of answer is 18 seconds. The peer group's at 45 seconds. The abandonment rate is 2.9%. The peer group's at 8.1%. Now, when I asked this company, the manager of the service desk, why they had an 18-second ASA and a 2.9% abandonment rate, her answer was because the CIO told us to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. So that's a classic example of someone who thinks that good service levels equate to high levels of customer satisfaction. Clearly it didn't. Now the diagnosis here is pretty straightforward. Low utilization because the service levels are simply too aggressive. So the prescription was quite easy. It's back off of these service levels, and what you'll find is that you won't need the headcount that you have. In fact, if you look at your turnover, this is, by the way, a high turnover industry. This particular peer group has about 32% turnover per year. The service desk that did this benchmark had about 30% turnover, so roughly in line with the peer group. The good news is if you have to attrit, that is, you've got to drop headcount, you can usually do it through attrition. You can drop headcount through attrition as opposed to through layoffs. So our advice to them was you need to drop about 6 FTEs so that you can get your utilization up to around 54, 55%. You're going to see that your costs will drop as a result of that, but your service levels are also going to creep up. You're going to find that your ASA will go up and your abandonment rate will go up as well, but don't be worried or freaked out by that. That's actually a good thing because what you're doing is you're reducing your cost, you're dropping headcount, reducing cost, improving utilization, at the expense of service levels, which don't, by the way, matter all that much. Short story here is that over a period of about 4 months, 120 days, they did exactly that. They did not backfill as they attrited. They dropped 6 FTEs. Their ASA went up to around 50 seconds. Their abandonment rate went up to around 7%, and their cost per contact dropped to around $21. Pretty straightforward diagnosis, Pretty straightforward prescription. They acted on it. They got the results they wanted. What about customer satisfaction? Well, we know that FCR is a big driver here, so let's look at their first contact resolution rate. It's 51.3%. The peer group's at 71.2%. So we want to know why. Well, is it because of lack of training? Well, yeah. Their new agents got 36 hours of training compared to 79 hours for the peer group. Annually, their agents got 12 hours of training versus 34 for the peer group. So again, the diagnosis and the prescription was pretty straightforward here. Our recommendation, you need to up the training hours, and specifically, you need to emphasize in the training the importance of first contact resolution rate as a key driver of customer satisfaction. So again, pretty straightforward diagnosis, pretty straightforward prescription. The company took action on that within 120 days. They had improved. They had given remedial training specifically related to FCR to all of their agents. They had bumped their agent training hours to 110 for new agents, to 30 hours per year for their veteran agents. They saw their first contact resolution rate improve to almost 80%, and they saw their customer satisfaction improve to almost 85%. So pretty straightforward diagnosis, pretty straightforward prescription. They got the result that they wanted. And that's the real power of KPIs, is understanding how they're connected to each other, being able to diagnose performance gaps that you might identify, being able to develop prescriptive actions based upon that diagnosis, and then ultimately acting on that. I'm going to stop and answer a few questions at this point. Let's see, I've got about 20 minutes left in the webcast, so I'm only going to answer a few questions right now. Any questions that I don't get to right now, I will get to at the conclusion of the webcast. Okay, first question is from Noor, and the question is, can you have the PowerPoint slides? The answer is yes. Just fill out the questionnaire that pops up on your screen when you exit the webcast, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of today's slides. Okay, next question. What were the U.S. percentages again? That's from Shanta. I'm not sure what slide you're referring to, Shanta. Could you elaborate on that, and then I'll answer the question for you. Okay, from Thomas. I understand slide 20. Your reference to quality is measured by customer satisfaction. The two metrics may be correlated, but they are very different. To me, QA is the internal and absolute metric as measured by our internal standards, i.e. objective and subjective. So I think what you're saying, and it's a long question, Thomas. I apologize for not reading it all, but I'm time constrained here. And you're suggesting that your internal QA is more important than customer satisfaction. I think that's what you're saying. If it is, I'll push it back on you and say I couldn't disagree more. I don't care what your internal QA says. If your customers say you're not good, you're not good. Ultimately, the customer is a true measure of the quality of service that you're delivering. And if they're not happy, you're doing something wrong. So yeah, QA is important. You need to be looking at call quality, and it's important for internal improvement. But if your QA scores say that you're 95%, 96%, and your CSAT is down around 60 or 70%, you're blowing it. Because customer satisfaction is the ultimate measure of success. I don't care what your internal measures say. So again, I hope I'm not misinterpreting your question, but CSAT trumps everything, okay? I don't care what your internal measures are saying. Okay, from Janet, will the presentation be available? Yes, I just answered that question. Pause, what is SPOC? SPOC means single point of contact. From Bruce, what happens if you don't have any competing support organizations for your same market segment? Is there a general repository of information available? Chances are, Bruce, there are going to be organizations. They may not look exactly like you for benchmarking purposes, but there are likely to be some organizations that are comparable enough so that you can do a valid benchmark. The point is that there are organizations out there if you want to do a comparative benchmark. If you want to talk about that in more detail, how a benchmark would work, I don't want to do a sales pitch here, but you can contact MetricNet. You can email us at info@metricnet.com or call me directly, and I can walk you through how you find that peer group and how you do the benchmarking comparison. Okay, one final question before I get back to our presentation, and then again, any questions I didn't get to just now, I will answer in more detail with the conclusion. This question is from Shanta. To keep cost per contact low and FCR high, what is the best practice for the time cases with first level agent? There is no best practice on that, Shanta, but what I will say is that a bad practice is to limit the handle time at level 1. We sometimes, when we're doing benchmarks or assessments, we'll find that the level 1 agents have to, at 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 9 minutes or 10 minutes, they have to push the ticket out to some other level of support. I think that's a bad practice. I would much rather see an organization leave it to the judgment of the agent and say, you know, stick with it as long as you think there's a reasonable chance of getting it resolved at level 1. Don't spend your whole day doing it. You probably don't even want to spend an hour doing it, but I really think that's a judgment call that the agent should have control over. I don't think there's any particular time limit that it can and should stay at first level. Like I said, I think that should be the call of the agent. However, the agents still need to be held accountable for their productivity and their first contact resolution rate. And so what you've got here is a set of competing metrics. You've got a productivity metric, i.e. how many tickets do you handle in a month. You've got a first contact resolution rate metric, and you should have a customer sat metric that's tied back to that agent. Now those three need to be in dynamic tension, and you need to find the point of minimum tension. So if you've got an agent that's spending too much time on a ticket because they want to get it done at first level, it's going to hurt their productivity metric. It may not hurt the other metrics like FCR or customer sat, but it's going to hurt their productivity metric. So if you have the right incentives in place, if you have the right metrics in place to ensure that the agents are not gaming the system by solving only the easy stuff and passing on the harder things, and you give them the judgment, you give them you empower them to make their own decision about when to push it out to desktop support or end level or level 1.5, as the case might be, I think you actually, that's the best of all worlds. And I realize there's no hard and fast rule there, but that's the way it should be. I really think that determining when to push a ticket beyond level 1, even if it's just a level 1.5, should be a decision that the agent makes. Okay, there are other questions here, but I want to make sure that I finish on time. So once again, I just want to assure you that at the conclusion of the webcast, I'm going to stay on as long as needed to make sure that I answer every question that you have. So let's talk about prescription. We talked about performance measurement, less is more. We've talked about diagnosis, which in a nutshell is benchmark at least once a year. And then prescription. What are we going to do with this information? What are we going to do with this diagnosis? There's a set of 4 charts here. The first one addresses performance measurement, and then we've got human resources, then we've got ticket handling, and then we've got technology. Now, you've all heard of this paradigm, people, process, technology. Most in the industry buy into this. Most believe that your fundamental building block is your human resources, and then you build your processes around your human resources, and then your technology is what empowers your processes and your people. So the technology becomes a slave to process and people, not the other way around. But I would submit to you that there's an even more fundamental building block, and that building block is performance metrics, and specifically the discipline of performance measurement and management. So the base of the pyramid is no longer people, and I know that sounds like heresy, but I'll show you the data that backs this up in a moment. You got performance measurement, people, process, and technology. Here's the data that suggests that, which is why I believe in this paradigm. If you look at the maturity of the metrics discipline from 143 organizations, most recent benchmarks we've done, and we regress that against the balanced scorecard. You know how the scorecard is created. You end up with a score between 0 and 100%. We can see here that the more mature the metrics are, the higher the balanced score typically is. Again, blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a linear regression that runs through the data. And as the metrics mature, 5 is the highest possible maturity, 1 is the lowest possible maturity. And this, by the way, comes from MetricNet's proprietary process maturity assessment, looking at 6 key areas. We look at strategy, we look at human resource management, we look at process and procedure, we look at performance measurement and management, we look at stakeholder communication, and we look at technology. So specifically as it relates to metrics, the more mature the metrics are, the higher you can expect your balanced scorecard to be. And this is why we believe that metrics are an even more fundamental building block than people, process, and technology. If you don't have metrics in place, it doesn't matter how good your people are. It doesn't matter how good your processes are. It doesn't matter how great your technology is. If you don't have performance measurement and management, a good discipline there in order to measure performance, diagnose performance gaps, develop actions based upon that diagnosis, and then act on it, it doesn't matter how good your people, process, and technology are. So the 4 slides here represent a cheat sheet of sort. Again, people, human resources, process, technology. To illustrate how these are used, I'm going to look at the human resources chart. And again, this is a little bit of a cheat sheet. What I've done is I've listed some of the more common best practices down the left-hand column. This is not an all-inclusive list of human resource best practices, but these are some of the better-known best practices when it comes to human resource management. I've given a shorthand in the left column for the best practice, and then a bigger or a more comprehensive description of the best practice in the center column here. Over on the right-hand side, what we have are a series of columns called the affected KPIs. And I've listed several KPIs here. I've got cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, and so on. Now, at the intersection of these affected KPIs and these best practices, you will find a cell. That cell will either be white, light blue, or dark blue. A white cell indicates that there is little or no cause-effect relationship between the KPI and the best practice. So training has almost no impact on agent utilization. However, first call resolution rate, dark blue cell here, if it's a dark blue cell, it's an indication that the affected KPI is strongly correlated to the best practice. There's a strong cause-effect relationship there. So if you're trying to improve your first contact resolution rate, training has a lot to do with that. Now that's pretty common sense, but some of these are not so common sense. Finally, a light blue color in the cell indicates that there is a weak cause and effect relationship between the affected KPI, in this case call quality, and the best practice, in this case recruitment. So what this indicates is once you've done your benchmark, let's say you find that there is a gap in customer satisfaction or contact handle time or turnover, you can look at this set of charts, the performance measurement chart, the human resources chart, the ticket handling chart, and the technology chart, and you can identify best practices that will help you remediate some of these issues. So if I've got a problem with utilization, oftentimes just establishing a standard around utilization or giving agents a target on the number of contacts that they handle in a month. Let's say you've got an agent handling 200 contacts a month. The average agent in your support center is handling 200 contacts per month or 250 contacts per month. You want to establish a performance standard that gets them to improve the quality of their performance. Oftentimes just establishing a standard is enough to improve performance, whether it be in utilization, first call resolution rate or first contact resolution rate, or call quality. So this set of charts can be used diagnostically. Once you've done your benchmark, if you find that there's a gap in any one of these important key performance indicators, you can go through this set of charts and identify best practice remedies that will enable you to close gaps in customer satisfaction, in productivity or agent utilization, in first contact resolution rate, in call quality, and in call handle time. Another tool that we frequently use at MetricNet are tables that look like this. If we have a gap, say, in cost per contact, whatever the target performance might be, your target might be $10 per contact, or it might be $100 per contact. But we know that cost is driven by agent utilization, service levels like speed of answer and call abandonment rate, and the IVR completion rate or the agentless completion rate. So you could establish targets there that are designed to improve performance relative to this particular metric. So this isn't rocket science. This is just a real simple tool that we use at MetricNet. Whether it's closing a gap in customer satisfaction or agent job satisfaction, a chart like this helps clarify your thinking, helps make your thinking clear in terms of what can be done to improve agent job satisfaction. You could add training hours, both new agent training hours and veteran training hours. You could create a bona fide career path. You could provide additional and more effective coaching. You could put rewards and incentives in place. So again, these are just simple tools that you can use to diagnose and remediate performance gaps that you identify in your performance, typically as a result of benchmarking. Finally, I want to take a look at implementation, the fourth component of our model here. So far, we've talked about measurement, less is more, diagnosis, do benchmarking, prescription, focus first on metrics, and then on people, process, and technology. And finally, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we're actually going to do something with the prescription, and we're going to gain some benefit as a result of these metrics that we've been tracking. Now here's a fairly straightforward action plan that was put together by a client of ours a few years back. I've greatly simplified it for illustrative purposes, but this is what their action plan boiled down to. First, they did a benchmark, and they did not perform well at all on their benchmark. Their balance score was around 11%. So they were the worst in their peer group when they did the benchmark. Some of the key action items that came out of that were that they needed to document their contact handling standards. They were going to create a balanced scorecard. They were not surveying their customers, so they resolved to start surveying customers. They did not have an agent career path, and their turnover was in the 70% range. So they decided to document an agent career path. They began doing root cause analysis to reduce the number of inbound tickets. That is, increase the level -1 resolution rate. They established agent performance standards. They rewrote their IVR menu to increase the password reset resolution rate without the use of an agent. And finally, they implemented call monitoring using Verint Witness. Very straightforward action plan, but it is indicative. And by the way, within this 10-month period of time, they did, in fact, achieve world-class performance. Their balance score went from 11% to, in excess, it was around 71, 72% by the time they had implemented all of this. They got from literally last on the list to not quite first on the list, but top quartile performance in only about 9 or 10 months. It is possible. Let's not forget that one of the key uses of performance indicators are to establish performance goals. What I've shown here are examples of performance goals established for the help desk or the service desk and performance goals that are established for individual agents. Keep in mind that the service desk is not a living, breathing entity, so that the service desk itself does not respond to performance goals. And so you have to push performance targets down to the individual agent level if you want to achieve better performance in your service desk overall. Now, typically, the goals that you establish for your agents are going to be higher than the goals you establish for your service desk, with the expectation that some of the agents might miss their performance targets. But this is critical. Key performance indicators are a key part of driving accountability within service and support. It's fine to establish performance goals for your service desk, and you should establish performance goals for your service desk. But unless you push them down to the individual level and hold individual agents accountable for customer satisfaction and a productivity metric, typically the number of contacts handled per month, and call quality, to the question that one of our viewers had a few moments ago, emphasizing the importance of call quality, and first contact resolution rate. Unless you are pushing these targets down to the individual agent level, you're not going to get the performance that you're looking for at the service desk level. So use metrics to establish performance targets both for the service desk, but recognize that you need to push those targets down to the individual agent level to get the kind of performance that you need out of your service desk overall. Now, the scorecard that I introduced earlier can be repurposed in a whole variety of ways. Specifically, what we find occurring more and more frequently is that the scorecard is being used for individual agent performance. And these are the metrics that are oftentimes included. You can make up your own scorecard and include whatever metrics you want. But the inbound contacts handled, this is a productivity metric. Customer satisfaction by agent, assuming that you can measure it by agent. If you've got event-driven surveys, you should be able to tie your survey results back to individual agents. You've got your productivity metric here, FCR, teamwork, initiative, and mentoring. Those are very subjective, but you can put them on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 says you're not doing it, 5 says you're doing it, and you're doing it very well. Even subjective factors, and you should include subjective factors in your scorecard for the agents, even things like teamwork and initiative and mentoring can be objectified by putting them on a numerical scale, as we've done here. Now, mechanically, this scorecard works exactly like the overall service desk scorecard works. And the beauty of this is that if you update the scorecard on a monthly basis and then have a feedback session with each of your agents, you can deliver very objective feedback for them and very incisive recommendations on what those individual agents can do to improve their performance. As you all know, everybody on this call has been on the receiving end of supervisor feedback, and most of you have been on the giving end of supervisory feedback. And you know that oftentimes those sessions they can be awkward, but generally they're just too subjective. You know, you'll sit down with somebody and you'll say, hey, you're doing a pretty good job. You know, I like your contact handling metrics. Your handle time is about where it needs to be, and it seems like your customers are pretty happy with what you're doing. That's very, very subjective. It's very squishy. It's not terribly actionable. But by putting that agent's performance in a scorecard, when you sit down with that agent, you can deliver very specific feedback. For this particular agent, they're doing a great job when it comes to teamwork. They're doing a great job when it comes to mentoring. They're not doing such a great job when it comes to customer satisfaction, so they've got to up their game when it comes to quality. They're doing a reasonable job when it comes to productivity. They're handling a good number of inbound contacts. So this gives you very objective metrics that you can use to deliver feedback, very targeted feedback to each individual agent on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, even a weekly basis if you choose to do that. Moreover, what most of our clients are now doing is posting the results of their monthly scorecards. Now, you're not doing this to embarrass anybody, so we don't actually list the agent name out here, but you're doing this to let every agent know how they stack up. Agent number 11 ranks number 1 this month. Agent number 18, whoever that person is, ranks number 25 this month. And again, the goal here is not to embarrass anybody, but to let them know how they are performing relative to their peers. Now, this is good because those agents that are really committed to doing a good job are going to work hard to try and move up this ladder. Those that are really maybe in the wrong position oftentimes will self-attrit out. If they find that they've consistently been in the bottom quartile and they just don't seem to be moving up, a lot of times those agents will attrit out of the organization. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If somebody's in the wrong job and they just can't do it, and let's face it, this is a really difficult job, banging phones all day, taking 911 calls from frustrated end users, it's not an easy thing to do. There are some people that have a good personality for this position. There are many people that can't do this job or can't do it for very long. And so when a person finds out and they discover that, they're just consistently performing in the bottom quartile of their peers within the service desk, maybe it is time for them to take a look at another opportunity, either with the company or outside the company, and move on. So creating the agent scorecard does a lot of good things for you. It objectifies the feedback process. It gives the agent something very tangible that they can latch onto and identify how they can improve their performance. And if you do choose to post the performance, the overall performance scores, it lets them know and understand how they compare to the peers that they are working with. Let's sum up what we've learned so far. And I want to start by sharing a comic with you that a client of mine sent to me more than a dozen years ago. And the comic reads, delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to? Well, remember our model addresses not customer satisfaction, but customer enthusiasm. You see, satisfied customers are not loyal customers. They don't propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. And so what you really need are enthusiastic or delighted customers, and here's why. We did a survey a couple of years back. More than 1,000 organizations participated in this. We contacted their CIOs. We essentially said, we know that you do an annual survey of your end users to find out what they think of IT. Would it be okay if we added one question to your survey? We will share the results with you if you agree to participate in this. And the question that we added to those surveys asked the users that were participating in these surveys what drove their view of IT within their organizations. It was a multiple choice question. We gave them, I think, about 25 different choices. We told them to pick their top 3, and the stunning conclusion was this. 84% of the respondents said that the service desk is a key driver of their opinion, not just of service and support, but of all corporate IT. 47% said that desktop support is a significant driver of their view of all of corporate IT. Now, this makes sense if you think about it, because your average end user has frequent interactions with the service desk and desktop support. If they're like most, the average in the industry is that they're going to have 2 contacts per month with the service desk and 1 contact every other month with desktop support. So naturally, you would expect them to project their experience with service desk and desktop support onto all of IT. So service and support is the gateway to IT for the vast majority of end users. What you do as service and support professionals has repercussions throughout the organization. It reflects either positively or negatively on all of IT. One implication for senior managers, and I know we've got quite a few CIOs on the phone today, is that I think this makes very clear the importance of IT service and support. Even though it represents, on average, about 5% of total IT spending, it has a disproportionate influence on what end users think of all of IT. So if I'm a chief technology officer or a chief information officer and I'm aware of this data, I can tell you I'm going to make whatever investments I can, not just in headcount, training, technology, and so on, in IT service and support to make sure that it's the best possible interface our end users can have. But I'm going to personally spend time and attention on this, whether it's in person, going down there once a week and talking to those folks, or getting on the phone or doing a Skype or a webcast with them or something. I'm going to make sure that I take a personal interest in this, because service and support is a reflection of all of IT. And by proxy, the quality of service and support is a reflection of the quality of the leadership in information technology. Let's talk about what we can do going forward. First, I want to summarize what we've done here today. We've talked about performance measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation. Real quickly, when it comes to measurement, less is more. Make sure you include a balanced scorecard. benchmark your performance at least once a year, but select an appropriate peer group. There was a question a few moments ago about how you find that peer group, and I indicated to that person that we can take that offline, and I can explain how that peer group is identified. Use the key performance indicators, the short list of 7 that we've defined in this presentation. Identify your performance gaps and determine why those gaps exist. Remember the cause and effect diagram of the KPIs that I showed you. Then develop a simple action plan based on the gap analysis and the industry's best practices that we've shared with you today. Go for a short list of low-hanging fruit. You don't have to hit a home run right out of the gate. Do what's realistic in the near term. But here's the acid test. Every action should have the effect of either reducing your cost or improving customer satisfaction or both. If it doesn't yield 1 or 2 of those benefits, if it doesn't either reduce your cost or improve customer satisfaction, you haven't achieved your objective. So every action you take needs to move the needle on one of those or both of those metrics, cost and customer satisfaction. And then finally, implement your action plan. Build buy-in up front, assign ownership and accountability for those who are responsible for implementing the action plan, put performance goals in place, monitor your progress, but you should expect positive and measurable results in a relatively short period of time. And by short period of time, I mean 90 days or less. If you're not seeing positive results as a result of this within 90 days or less, something has gone wrong. So let me summarize by saying that performance measurement and management should be viewed holistically. It goes well beyond tracking and trending. It produces actionable insights. The near-term goal, if you're serious about this, should be improve performance. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is achieve world-class performance. Effective performance measurement and management is the key to becoming world-class. I spoke earlier about the correlation between metrics maturity and the balanced scorecard. The metrics discipline is the single most important discipline in IT service and support. It's an important discipline to master. If you do master it, there's, as I mentioned, a one-to-one correlation between those that are strong in service and support and those that those that are strong in performance measurement and management and those that are world-class. But the key to getting results is to take action. And for those of you who are around in the 1990s, you may recall a famous ad campaign that Nike had, just do it. That's the trick here. You just have to do it. Once you've measured your performance, diagnosed your performance, and come up with an action plan, you have to act on it. So I want to give you some suggestions here as to what you can do going forward to gain some benefit from today's webcast. There are 6 specific actions here. And in a moment, I will get to the questions that are queued up that have been typed into the dialog box. But I do want to make these closing remarks. First, I want to encourage all of you once again to take a look around our website at MetricNet.com. We've got a resource library there where you can download all sorts of good stuff. All you have to do is become a member. It doesn't cost anything to become a premium member, and then every time you come to our website, you can go immediately to the resource library and download the white papers, look at the presentations, the archived webcasts, whatever you'd like to take off the website, you're welcome to. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. In the presentation itself, which we'll send you if you complete the survey that pops up when you exit the webcast, we've included links which will allow you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. If you'd like to register for our upcoming webcast next month, we've got one on best practices in desktop support, and in November we'll be addressing call center best practices. Our resource library is chock-a-block full of white papers, presentations, and recorded webcasts. If you're interested in doing a benchmark, we have peer group, industry benchmarks, and benchmarking data files. And if you're interested in our one-year path to world-class performance, we guarantee that within 12 months you will become a world-class service and support organization by going through this program. For more information, you can either go to our website at MetricNet.com or you can email us at info@MetricNet.com. Don't forget, session 302 next month at Fusion. If you're there, I'd love to have you in my presentation. Please don't forget to introduce yourself. You can reach MetricNet in the United States at this phone number, 703-992-7559, or on our website, or by sending us an email, info@MetricNet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I just want to thank you for attending the session. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Once again, don't forget to complete the survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. It's only 3 questions long. It will take you only 15 seconds to answer, and it is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let me go ahead and take a look at the questions that we've got queued up. Okay. All right. Question from Michael. What about service requests versus incident management? I'm not sure what the question is, but at a level 1 service desks, typically the incoming contacts are one of two varieties, as you're suggesting. There are incidents, and then there are service requests. A typical incident is something that comes up unexpectedly. It might be a hardware or software break-fix, for example. It might be a password reset. Could be a lot of different things. A service request, by contrast, typically involves something that needs to be scheduled. You need to schedule a move, add, change, for example. You need to schedule a re-imaging of your computer. You need to schedule the delivery of your tablet computer, that sort of thing. So, Michael, typically the service desk is held accountable for incidents. So when you're looking at first contact and first level resolution rate, typically it's measured against the incident volume, not the total volume, because service requests generally can't be done at level 1. Some of them can be, but generally service requests have to be scheduled and dispatched out to desktop support or some other organization, a project group, for example. So there is a distinction made between incidents and service requests, and for that reason you have, when it comes to first contact resolution rate and first level resolution rate, you have what's called gross FLR and gross FCR, and you have net FLR and net FCR. The gross on first contact resolution rate would look at everything resolved on first contact divided by all inbound contacts. That's the gross FCR. The FLR definition is the same, everything resolved at first level divided by all inbound contacts. But the net is going to carve out of the denominator things that can't be done on first level, and that would include typically service requests. So the net FCR and net FLR is going to be higher than your gross FCR and FLR. The reason is that you carve certain things out of the denominator that just can't be done remotely. You can't do a move, add, change remotely if it's a physical move, add, change. You can't replace a hard drive remotely. You can't re-image a computer remotely. So those are things that get carved out of the denominator for net FCR, net FLR, and those typically are service requests. Okay, from Ali, what if the client demands a lower ASA? If the client demands a lower ASA, just ask them to pay for it. That's the simple answer there. I mean, if the client wants a lower ASA and it's going to cost you an extra $5 a contact or something like that, then have them pay for it. And then you'll figure out very quickly whether or not they need that quicker ASA. Now, there are some environments, Ali, where a quick speed of answer is very critical. If you're in a medical environment, for example, if you're supporting traders on a trading floor in a financial services environment, there are certain examples where an aggressive ASA is justified and required because of the business consequences of a delay in that speed of answer. But in most cases, if your client says, I need a lower ASA, it depends on how much lower they're talking about. But if they really think they need it, then I would ask, my response would be, then you got to be willing to pay for it because it's going to bump our costs. Okay, so let's see, we go on to say, Ali, that your average handle time is 10 minutes and the client has given you a target of 30 seconds. Okay, well, I think that 30-second target is nonsense, to be blunt. 30 seconds on a 10-minute handle time, what's the difference if the ASA is a minute? Okay, it's 30 seconds out of a total transaction time of 11 minutes. That's insignificant. And my suggestion is your client needs to get more reasonable about what that ASA is, but if they still demand a 30-second ASA, then they should be willing to pay for it. Okay. From Marixa, it should be a survey question, so I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there, Marixa. If you want to elaborate on that, I might be able to respond to it. Okay, from Jeffrey, how do you benchmark customer satisfaction when it's such a subjective measurement depending on how the surveys are conducted? You're absolutely right, Jeff. Customer satisfaction, depending upon how you survey the customers, can be very subjective. There's survey bias in almost every survey that's administered. That's what we've seen. However, what I would recommend, most of you are familiar with HDI. They have a tool called CSI, Customer Satisfaction Index. It's one of the few unbiased tools in the industry. There's no survey bias in that tool. And it's probably one of the most effective things you can do. If you're not measuring customer satisfaction or you feel like you're measuring it and you're not getting a very good result, the CSI tool by HDI, formerly the Help Desk Institute, is probably one of the best tools that you can look at. They've eliminated survey bias. Now, beyond that, if you do choose to do it yourself, what you want to do is keep the survey relatively short. you have to recognize that there are different channels that you can deliver that survey through. You can email the survey, you can do phone interviews for the survey, or you can do flash surveys at the conclusion of a client contact where the client stays on the phone and pushes the buttons based upon the questions that they get. So there's a lot of different ways you can administer a survey. The key thing is you got to keep the questionnaire brief. Typically, you're going to measure the survey responses on a scale of 1 to 5. And you need to ask the customer about a variety of things, soft skills like did the agent show courtesy and professionalism, but you also get to the heart of the matter. Overall, how would you rate your level of satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5? That's the single most important question to be included in your survey. Okay, from Michael, when can a pass-through be counted as a first contact or first level resolution? I'm not sure what you mean by a pass-through, but if you're talking about an end user that bypasses level 1 and goes directly to desktop support or some other source of support, that's not going to count as either first level or first contact because it's completely bypassed the SPOC model. But at the same time, it's not the fault of those that work in level 1, so you can't really hold that against them. If you're talking about a pass-through where a contact comes into level 1 and they immediately push it out, that also will never be counted as either first contact or first level resolution. There is one caveat here on first contact resolution, which is that if you do a hot transfer, some people call it a warm transfer, from level 1 to some other source of support, and the user doesn't hang up the phone or conclude the chat, then it will be resolved on first contact. So it is possible to not resolve at level 1, but resolve on first contact. So a customer calls in, you're taking the call, you conference somebody else in, and the two of you, even though the other person might be at second level or third level, you might even transfer them to that person, they resolve. That user got a first contact resolution rate even though it wasn't resolved at first level. Okay, from Sanjay. How does a service desk manager convince management that abandoned call rate is not the biggest measure of performance? You need to show them those charts, Sanjay, that I showed you today to show them that abandonment rate has almost no impact on customer satisfaction when your AR is below 10%. What does matter is your first contact resolution rate. Show them those charts to convince them that service levels are relatively unimportant, but first contact resolution rate is very important. Therefore, you should be investing in things that improve your FCR, like training, tools, remote diagnostic tools. I mentioned a couple names earlier, like LogMeIn, BombGuard, GoToAssist, and knowledge management. All of those things can help to improve your first contact resolution rate and hence improve your customer satisfaction. Adding bodies to reduce your speed of answer or your abandonment rate is not a good investment. Okay, from looks like A, and just all I have is the first initial A and a last name, Pastors, about cost. If a call is resolved by the desktop support, for example, the total cost is the one related by the support plus the first level or just the desktop one. It depends on whether or not that call goes through level 1. If the call goes through level 1 and then it gets pushed out to desktop support, it's an additive cost. So you got $22 at level 1 plus the $62 on average in North America for desktop support. So those costs are additive, and I'm glad you asked that question because the cost of resolution at level 2 is not just that cost. If it's gone through previous levels, if it's gone through level 1, then you're going to add on that cost as well. Okay, from Lewis, I hope I'm pronouncing it Lewis or Luis. How do you benchmark non-IT support centers such as HR, business, and finance? So the same way you benchmark support centers. You look at a similar set of metrics. You look at first contact resolution rate. You look at handle time. You look at customer satisfaction. You benchmark them in the same way. You just benchmark against a different peer group. And by the way, we're doing an increasing, in the industry, there's an increasing number of those types of non-IT support centers like human resources, benefits, business, finance, payroll, and the like. You can benchmark it. The methodology is exactly the same way as what I've described here in this presentation. The metrics might differ a little bit, but the methodology is very much the same. Okay, from Thomas, let's see. I didn't state QA was more important. I stated that it was different. Your slide treated or certainly appeared to make them the same metric. No, they're definitely not the same metric. Internally measured quality is vastly different from customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is the external view, as you know, of the quality of service you're delivering. The internal QA can be good for training your agents, for identifying ways that they can improve their performance and whatnot, but the ultimate measure of quality is the customer perspective. So they're both important metrics, but the one that matters the most, which is why it's a foundation metric, is your customer satisfaction. Okay, Ingrid, can you explain difference between desktop support and field support? Yeah, desktop support, it's a bit of an arbitrary definition, but desktop support doesn't have to get into a vehicle to provide service to the customer. Field support is typically driving, sometimes flying, taking a train. Give you an example. If you're a desktop support technician in a high-rise building, you don't have to go very far, typically between tickets. You can walk that or take the elevator or take the stairs. By contrast, if you're doing desktop support on a military installation, a great big military base, it's not unusual to do only 1 or 2 tickets a day because you have to drive so far. Like if you're in Camp Pendleton, California, it's not unusual for a desktop support tech to have to drive 2 hours each way to and from a ticket. So the arbitrary definition, Ingrid, is that if you have to get into a vehicle, it becomes field support. If you don't have to get into a vehicle, it's just regular desktop support. Okay, from Ben, how critical is the cost per contact? Without this, can we continue to measure against benchmarks, analyze the data, and take the necessary actions? Well, cost per contact is one of the 2 most important metrics, the other one being customer satisfaction. If you're not measuring it, you should. It's pretty easy. All you do is you look at your costs. And those costs, by the way, should include not just your agent salaries and benefits, but also salaries and benefits for your indirect personnel, the supervisors, team leads, and so on. You should also include your cost of facilities and your, if you have a real estate department in your company, they can tell you what the cost per square foot of facilities is. You need to include your telecom cost, your technology expense, all the licensing fees you pay to your software vendors and whatnot, your travel, your training, your office supplies. In other words, you want your total cost divided by the total inbound volume. That's your cost per contact. And figuring that out is usually not that hard. So if you're not tracking it, you should be tracking it. I would not recommend benchmarking until you do start tracking your cost per contact. Okay. Paz again asked about SPOC. It's single point of contact. And there were slides back around page 15 or so, Paz, that talk about single point of contact. Okay, from Kevin, the correlation charts, ASA versus CSAT, what are the R values? How strong are the correlations? I can't tell you off the top of my head. R, by the way, just so you know, is a measure of its quality of fit when you're running a regression, a linear regression or a nonlinear regression through a set of data points. And R, it's actually R squared is the number you look at, but it's an indication of goodness of fit. I don't know, Kevin. I could probably figure it out pretty quickly, but the answer is relatively unimportant. The key thing is to recognize that there is not just a correlation, but a cause and effect relationship there. Okay, from Shanta, I'm responsible for both first level and second level PC supports. I would also be interested in strategies for KPIs for desktop support. Then I would suggest you sign up for next month's webcast, Shanta. In October, we'll be doing a webcast on best practices in desktop support. Okay, is there a way to get a recorded version of the presentation? That's from Jamie. The answer is yes. Fill out the survey when you get off the webcast, and we will send you a link to the recorded presentation. We'll also send you an electronic copy of the presentation you're looking at right now. Okay, from Shanta, SLA seems pretty important. KPI at my company, notice it is not one of the recommended here. Yeah, I've addressed that multiple times. Service levels are relatively unimportant. Okay, again from A. Pastors, wish I knew your first name. What is the typical rate between number of tickets registered and number of contacts done? We've seen it, sometimes we've seen more tickets than contacts, but usually it's fewer tickets than contacts. The ratio ranges from 50%, meaning that you have, for every 100 contacts you have 50 tickets, to as high as 150%, meaning for every contact you have 1.5 tickets. It really depends upon how an organization defines a ticket. Some organizations, you know, if they get 100 calls on a network outage, they'll, believe it or not, they'll call that 100 tickets. Most would call that a single ticket. So generally, the ticket volume is less than the contact volume. The average is around 80%. That is, the ticket volume is about 80% of the contact volume on average. Okay, question from Suzanne. I like to have one team of people from SPOC and desktop support as level 1. Is that a good idea, or will you have challenges? If you can mention a few regarding measures with KPIs. In some cases, Suzanne, it does make sense to have a combined level 1 and desktop support group. There are a few key success factors, though. Generally, it's only going to work when you are co-located with your users to facilitate what's called jump and run, meaning you get a call, you're trying to resolve it remotely, you can't get it resolved remotely, so you jump and you run to the side of the problem. So it's called jump and run. Now, in order to make that work, you got to be co-located with your customers. So you can't be a remote desk across town, across the state, across the world, or anything else. So you got to be co-located with your end users. That's the first thing. Second thing is that you've got to have relatively low scale. Generally, if you have fewer than 12 combined technicians for level 1 support and desktop support, you've got low enough scale to justify this. If you've got more than 12 technicians, say you've got 15, 20, 30 technicians in total between level 1 and desktop support, it makes more sense to specialize and have some that do just desktop support and some that do just level 1 support. The third success factor is to recognize that someone who's good at level 1 support is not necessarily good at desktop support, and vice versa. In fact, if you look at the Venn diagram, you take a group of people that are really good at level 1 support and a group of people that are really good at desktop support, and you look at the overlap, it's only about 20%, meaning that only about 20% of good desktop support techs are good at remote resolution, and only about 20% of good level 1 techs are good at desktop support. So you need to be careful about trying to turn everybody into both a level 1 agent and a desktop support agent. You want to cross-train some of them or have some of them that are qualified and allowed to do both level 1 support and desktop support. So those are some of the key success factors in making that work. So it does make sense in certain situations. Okay, Ali, okay, so to follow up on a previous question you had, retail store support. Yeah, in general, when you're in a retail environment and you've got sales at stake and a POS, point of sale device, is not working properly, whether it's a cash register or a scanner or something like that, or if worse, if the servers and the printers at the store are not working, it's pretty serious. So yeah, aggressive service levels are sometimes justified when you're in a sales environment. That is when the service levels can potentially impact a sale. So that's one of the exceptions to the rule, Ali. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, from Marixa, first contact resolution, sorry, should this be in the survey questions offered after call completion with the customers? Absolutely. Anytime you can piggyback your first contact resolution rate question on top of your customer satisfaction survey, that's good, because the customer is the one who decides if you solved on first contact, not you. You may think that you resolved on first contact, but if the customer says no, even if they're wrong, you're still right. So what you want to do is include in your customer survey a question about first contact resolution rate, very simple question that says, did your incident, your problem, your issue get resolved on your first contact with the service desk? Let them answer that as part of the overall customer satisfaction question. So that's an excellent question. Okay, from Marie, can you please contact me about a peer benchmarking report? Yes, I'll do that. Okay, you have a fairly lengthy comment there, and I'm not trying to punt on it, Marie, but I want to make sure that that I get to the remaining questions. I will contact you, though, because it sounds like you're interested in doing a benchmarking, so I'll make sure that I get in touch with you following the webcast today. Okay, from Michael, cost per contact seems so variable since first call resolution can take up to an hour. How do you compare this with calls lasting 5 minutes? Well, you don't. When you're selecting a benchmarking peer group, you want to make sure, and I mentioned these 4 factors earlier, scope, scale, complexity, and geography have to be similar. Complexity is the big one. An hour-long call is a very complex call. A 5-minute call is fairly simple. A 5-minute call sounds like a Microsoft Office call, whereas a 1-hour call sounds like a complex how-to for a proprietary business application. Now, the fact is, nobody's doing all 1-hour calls and nobody's doing all 5-minute calls. Typically, you have a whole mix of calls, everything from a few minutes for a password reset to something that's much longer for more complex calls. The real issue is, what is the mix of calls? Are you getting mostly these 60-minute calls, or are you getting mostly these 5-minute calls? When you select a benchmarking peer group, you want to make sure that you select a peer group that looks comparable to yours in terms of the aggregate complexity. Now, the average handle time is going to be a proxy for that complexity. If your average handle time is 30 minutes, that's a fairly complex environment. If your average handle time is 4 minutes, that's a fairly straightforward environment. So cost per contact, as you're suggesting, implying here, is very much a function of handle time. You know, for a 1-hour handle time, your cost per contact is going to be in the range of $100 or more. For a 5-minute handle time, your cost per contact is going to be in the range of $10 or so. But it will vary depending upon what geography you are, whether it's in the United States, whether it's overseas, in India, the Philippines, Latin America, and whatnot. So there are many things that will impact your cost per contact, one of them being your handle time, another one being your geography, another one being the quality of the resources that you have working on the service desk. We've been able to show, for example, in North America that if you're willing to pay a little bit more for an entry-level resource source on the service desk, you get a much higher FCR and a much higher customer satisfaction and a lower handle time. So even though you're paying those entry-level resources a little bit more, you get a lower cost per contact because you have a more qualified person working on the desk. So yeah, you got to be careful about comparing cost per contact. You want to make sure that you compare against service desks that are comparable in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Okay, question from Ali, will there be any webinars on idle integration into service desks? We don't have a webinar right now. We do a ton of idle assessments, but we don't have any webinars right now on that, Ali. Any white papers or other resources about idle integration into the service desk? We do have some resources on our website that you can take a look at. If you have a specific question about idle integration, idle maturity, the benefits of idle, you can feel free to send me an email at info@metricnet.com, and I can address it more explicitly that way. Okay, let's see. Question here from Brian. To calculate cost per contact, if my service desk is externally outsourced, can I simply divide the monthly bill I get from the vendors, or do I need to factor internal management salaries as well? I would factor in your internal management. If it's a managed service, you are going to have resources, Brian, in-house that are managing that outsourcer, whoever that outsourcer is. So the true, and it's actually a price per contact, the true price per contact would look at what you're paying monthly to that vendor plus the prorated management salaries in your company required to manage that contract. That's the fair way to do it. So you'd add that up. Let's say you're paying, make up a number here, $250,000 a month to your vendor, and the prorated cost of your internal salaries is $25,000 a month. So you've got $275,000 per month. You divide that by your inbound call volume to get your price per contact, or you can divide it by the ticket volume to get your price per ticket. That way you can compare on an apples-to-apples basis against other organizations that have outsourced. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is compare your outsourced service desk to other organizations that are managing an in-source service desk, because you're going to be comparing price to cost. And we know those are very different things. Price will have built into it a profit margin, and it will have built into it the sales and marketing expense for that outsourcer. Now, I'm neither pro nor con outsourcing. I'm very neutral on that issue. I believe that the decision about outsourcing should be a business decision that looks at all the variables, the pros and cons, and what you're trying to achieve through outsourcing or through insourcing. But if you're going to benchmark an outsourced support desk, you need to compare yourself against other outsourced support desks, and that's very doable. It's possible to do. My point is that you don't want to compare against internally operated service desks, because typically their costs are going to be below yours, because they don't, unless yours is offshore, that is. But if you're in the same geography, the internal or in-source service desk is going to be less than yours, because they don't have to earn a profit and they don't have sales and marketing expense. So, all right, it looks like I'm at the end of the questions. Anybody, if you have any additional questions, please type them in. I'll stay on for another few seconds here. Otherwise, I'll wrap up the webcast. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank all of you once again for joining our webcast today. It was a real pleasure to have you here. I appreciate the opportunity to have you join us. I know your time is very valuable, and the fact that you took a couple hours, and in fact, most of you are still on the webcast, the fact that most of you took a couple hours out of your day to hear MetricNet talk about a topic we're passionate about, which are service desk key performance indicators, that really means a lot to me. So once again, please don't forget to complete the survey when you exit the webcast. It'll pop up automatically from GoToWebinar. Fill that out, and we'll send you not only a link to the recording of today's webcast, but we will also send you a copy of the slides that I've just been through. Thanks once again, everybody. This concludes our webcast. Goodbye now.